I have like a little funny intro thing.
No, that's fine. We need that.
Yeah. No.
Can anybody hear me?
Oh, we hear you.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello, friends.
Hello.
How you doing?
Doing okay. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Lovely. I'm constantly worried that my little setup here is going to fail me, which would be bad because, this is how book tours work now is you just hop on your USB mic and log into Zencaster, I suppose, or Zoom, I don't know whether it's live or taped. So
Nice.
this is what it all lives and dies on. Well, I'm so glad that we can make this work.
Yeah.
Same here.
We're super
we're-
excited.
I'm excited too. I love the concept of the pod, and as long as you guys don't turn out to be like KKK members or something. I haven't done a ton of research into you, so I'm going on faith here. My partner was pointing that out. She was like, I was telling her the story of how this ended up getting set up, and she's like, "Sounds great, but like, are they like horrible misogynists or something? You should probably check that." And I was like, "Yeah, we'll find out." But yeah, no, I'm very stoked to do it. Two of my favorite topics right in the title.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
That's what we're all about.
Yeah. Oh, I love the little, is that cat ears on the headphones there? It's very trendy. I love it.
How you know we're professionals.
Well, true, but that's my third favorite topic is cats. I have three of them.
I
So
saw.
comics and chronic and cats, that would be that'd be the real next level.
This is awesome. All right. Well, if you're ready, we'll get into it.
Yeah, let's rock and roll.
All right. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Comics and Chronic. Today we have a very special episode. As always, I am joined by my co-hosts, Anthony Iannaccio and Cody Willaka-Cannon. Today we have our very first guest. He is a journalist, a writer, an author. He's worked for Wall Street Journal, Vice, New York Magazine, and he has a book out right now called True Believer, The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee. Please welcome to the show, Abraham Riesman.
Hey. Very exciting. I thought you say I'm joined as always. Aren't there only like 2 episodes of this podcast so far?
Yeah,
It's cool. I'm not dissing. I just was making sure that I got the timeline right.
Yeah. We released the third one yesterday.
Okay, great. All right. Mazel tov. Very exciting.
Thank you.
Oh, man. Well, welcome to the show. It's really cool to have you here, actually.
I'm glad to be here. When we put out, should we tell the story of how I ended up here?
Yes,
For the listeners?
Yes,
absolutely.
so awesome.
So I've got this book coming out, and the way you do these things now, especially during COVID, is you just have to get as much media as you can because book tours are not really a thing anymore. So I put out the APB and was just like, anybody, who. Basically, I put out the APB that I wanted media coverage. Certain friends of mine had me on their podcasts, and I started to realize that the best interviews I was getting were on like these rando podcasts with no long-standing gigantic legacy. For whatever reason, those were just where the good questions were coming from, and also it was much more casual and fun. And so I just tweeted something about how if you have a rando podcast, invite me on. And you all were the only people who just replied to it. You were the only ones who shot me.
Yes.
Like I meant it, and nobody took me up except for the @Comics and Chronic Twitter handle, which tweeted at me like, "Hey, we're as small time as it gets. You want to have us?" And me being a longtime stoner and longer time reader of comic books, it seemed like it was a match made in heaven. So I'm really glad that we could make this work. And here we are.
Yeah. It doesn't get as any more grassroots than us.
Grassroots, exactly. There you go.
No pun intended, but now.
Yeah, and I'm honestly like so glad you responded. Like you said, we just shot our shot and it worked. I saw the tweet, I favorited it. I was like, maybe I'll try. Like left it alone for like 20, 30 minutes. And I'm like, all right, let's try. And you immediately answered. And I was like, holy shit.
Well, I feel like the reason I don't lose my mind in the world in general is like, look, I've got a verified check mark. I've worked for like a legacy media organization. I know the New York media world very well. So I like have those people in my life, but I feel like the reason I don't, completely become a horrible monster is I try to interact with as many like low follower accounts on Twitter as I can, like just interacting with people who are not, part of that shitty, weird ecosystem where we pretend that people who just happen to have lots of followers and, a verification badge are somehow a different breed of human being. And so, I was really glad you guys got in touch just because I don't know. Also, I like to think of myself as sort of having the Barack Obama model for what I'm pushing with my book, which is like small dollar donors. Like I'm going for people who have like less than 1,000 followers who like the stuff that I like. Let's get them to buy the book. If I can do that en masse, that's better than just trying to target like the elites who may or may not be interested. So,
right? No,
anyway,
that's smart.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out if it's smart. It's been fun, at least. I've enjoyed being in contact with people like that, but we'll see if it pays off for the book.
Well, when it comes to low follower accounts, you came to the right place.
I'm so stoked. That's exactly what I wanted. No, but I don't mean that as a diss. I really mean like it's just someday you'll have more followers, I'm sure, but I'm getting in on the ground floor.
Nice. So I guess I have two questions to start off with. Being as this is Comics and Chronic, are you smoking anything right now?
No, I was debating that. I was thinking, like, should I vape beforehand? If you guys want me to, I'm happy to.
We're not going to force you to do drugs.
Yeah,
because I don't want to come off like that. If we can pause it for a second, I can go get my vape. I don't know, or you guys can riff while I do that. Yeah.
What do you think?
We'll riff and vape as well.
Okay, give me 1 sec. I'm gonna go get something.
Sure. To all you listeners, we are holding for Abraham to get his vape.
Yes. Yeah, vaping.
We want the way to be comfortable and high on the show.
Right. But if you're like a friend and you come on the show, we're not waiting for you. You don't get this. You
don't
get this treatment.
Yeah, you just come prepared.
We don't have patience with our friends, only people we don't know.
Yeah. So, but yes, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the book. It was a fantastic book read so far. There's an excerpt that was released today.
Today.
Or
last week, depending on.
Last week, when you're listening to this.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll edit that out.
Yes. I'm terrible with time and we'll leave it at that. I'm terrible with time.
Okay. We're back. 1 sec.
Coming back.
Get the old headphones on. Okay. I've got my branded Tribe Tokes.
Whoa.
Shout out to Tribe Tokes.
Nice.
Is that showing up reversed?
Yeah.
It's a cool little switchblade. Unfortunately, the switchblade part is broken. I have another one where it's not broken, but I can't find that one. So you do just looks like some weird little thing in your pocket, and then
whoa. That's awesome.
That is neat.
I believe this is I can't remember what capsule is or cartridge this is. It's a sativa of some kind. I pretty much exclusively do sativa because if I do indica, I just fall immediately asleep.
Yeah,
I have a very powerful reaction to indica, which can be fun, but it's not fun for an interview or really doing work or anything.
Being productive.
Why am I telling you what an indica is? You guys know what indicas are. I'm giving you the rundown of that. I assume your listeners do as well.
Yeah, I'm a sativa. I like hybrids too because sometimes sativa make me nervous.
Yeah, like anxiety inducing. I don't know. I'm an indica guy myself.
I'm a sativa
Fair
guy.
enough.
I need energy.
Yeah, me too. I like to be at least somewhat productive when I'm stoned, as opposed to just like completely instantly falling asleep, which, even if productive just means like watching an old Japanese noir on Criterion or something.
Nice.
Like, that's better than just like I love how the smoke is now enveloping this entire Zoom, all the Zoom windows. We can smoke and vapor. Yeah. This is great. I have to say, this is the first time I've ever like publicly, only in the past like year and a half or so have I started like being open about the fact that I smoke pot or vape, whatever, that I use cannabis. I was very like ashamed of it for a long time. I was like the one kid in health class who like really listened and like incorporated all of the messages about how you shouldn't do drugs because it's going to ruin your life. So then like, I started I didn't really start getting into regularly doing it until I didn't do it at all until I was done with high school. Like I was a big prude in high school and just didn't touch any substance whatsoever. I was just like constantly worried that I was going to lose my productivity and my edge. I was very overly competitive. And then when I got to college, I did it like sometimes in college, a few times. I had some like pleasant memories, but I didn't like have any. It was just, if somebody else had some, it would be an interesting experience. And about a year after I graduated college, a friend of mine was like, we were like smoking a joint on my roof, looking at the stars. And she was like, you can just like buy this yourself, right? Like I can just give you the number of my dealer. I was like, you can just do that. Like, I just always assumed that it was going to be more of a process. Like I'd have to like go down some, rabbit hole of asking people questions to like get the answers and like go to a bar and like grab somebody and smash them to the table and be like, where's a dealer? I need to buy some weed. It turned out to be really easy. It was just like, she gave me the phone number and I called them up and, so that's what, 2009, something like that. And then subsequent to that, I've had periods where I've been like, I got to stop. I hate it. And I'll, quit it for a bit and then get back to a much, a healthier relationship with it. And it's been an interesting journey to go on because really only, like I said, in the past like year and a half, couple of years, have I started like openly talking about it with people. And it's unbelievably liberating. Because it hasn't actually held me back. One of the big turning points for that was like when I finished the first draft of the book, when I finished the manuscript. That year when I wrote it, I had left work full time. I was no longer full time at New York Magazine because I wanted to write the book. I needed to have that space. So I was smoking more pot or vaping or whatever more than like I ever had before. And yet it was the most productive and professionally successful like year of my life. Up until then, like I wrote this and researched and wrote this entire book and it went really well. And I was just like, maybe like this isn't something worth feeling ashamed of. Like you can get frustrated with it. Like if you're doing it too much and it's getting in the way of something, but like Definitely. It's been very interesting and liberating to sort of let go of the idea that I should like hate that I like pot.
Yeah. I totally get that because like when Jake's the one that came up with the name of the podcast, Comics and Chronic, and like I love doing this, but there was kind of a hesitation with the chronic part, like sure, maybe my family's listening or whoever's listening. But literally as soon, and again back to your tweet, as soon as you did that, I was like, maybe there's just something to just openly being about chronic.
I think well, that's the thing is like I've had the healthiest relationship I've ever had with pot has come after I sort of let go of the shame of going, I hate doing this. I hate myself for doing it. Once you can sort of just incorporate it as part of your life, then you can regulate it and modulate it in a much healthier way. You're not operating in that dichotomy of like, of absolutely none or way too much. You can just sort of find your way. And, so I was excited to be on the podcast just because I never get to talk about pot. It's like a huge part of my life. And like I talk about it one way street wise, like on Twitter, like occasionally it's sort of part of the personal brand as I'll tweet about weed, vaping, whatever. And it's very rarely a dialogue, like I have friends who are like very dear to me in no small part because they're like in the small select group that I feel like gets my experience with pot because they share it and we can have a conversation about it. And yet, more public forum, this is alien to me, but I feel like, I don't know, I'm doing it for my own self-gratification, but also I like being able to spread the message of like, hey, everybody have a healthy relationship with pot, as opposed to like getting caught in the mental, ditch that you can get into when you're not thinking clearly about yourself or its influence on you or whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So anyway, I agree.
Yeah. When I started smoking weed, my mom and dad didn't even try to tell me not to. They just told me like, if I'm going to start, ask my older brother and sister how to do it. So that way they can show me.
Right.
So I'm not some idiot. The first joint I ever rolled, I was like 15 and I did it with toilet paper because I didn't know what to use. And my mom caught me and
a real party with that.
Yeah. And my mom caught me and she wasn't even like mad. She was just like disappointed in my stupidity, I guess.
Yeah. That's so funny.
The first joint I ever rolled, I was like 16, and I didn't know you had to break up the weed before roll. So I just
nice, just like wrapped as like a little burrito of Oh, that's really funny. Yeah, I never figured out how to roll joints. That is like the one part of weed culture that is. It's the same way I can't put in contact lenses. For whatever reason, those two tasks, which would make my life a lot easier in some ways, or in some cases more fun, I just can't do my hands like that. So
me neither. I have stubby, crooked fingers. It just can't be done. It's impossible.
Yeah, I know. Well, for me, I don't know what it is. My fingers aren't even that bad. The hand-eye coordination. What can I say?
It takes a lot of practice. Like I always hated rolling a joint, but I just force myself to do it. Like it's still like it's always spilling out, and like it's always just I don't know. There's like an anxiety part about it if you can't get it right. But once you get the tuck and roll. Like you could do it every time.
The tuck and roll.
That's so funny. Yeah, I remember watching a how-to tutorial early on when I was smoking pot regularly. When I started buying it for myself, there was like this online tutorial video, I believe, from Donnie Danko, and I remember watching it. And it just had this like guy he was like enacting it. There was a narrator, and that narrator wasn't him. He was just doing the kind of like infomercially type like. What am I going to do here? But without saying that, just like, And it was, I found it adorable as a short film, but I learned nothing from it. I could not make myself actually get these things right. They always just looked like these misshapen little Cheetos and they didn't burn right. So what are you going to do?
So Abraham, I guess one of my questions first is, and I'm sure you got to ask this, but out of all like the pop culture icons, what made you choose Stan Lee in particular to do it?
Well, it's funny. I didn't, in both cases of the article that preceded this book and the book itself, it did not begin with me pitching. I've been a comics reader since I was a kid and a Marvel consumer even before I was a comics consumer, just watching the cartoons back in the early 90s. And then I sort of dropped off in comics around college. I was still reading some, but I kind of fell off with a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And then in my late 20s, I got back into comics, and then around then got a job at New York Magazine and started writing about comics just because one of the great privileges of being a journalist is you can sometimes explore things that you find interesting in a professional context, and that can really make for good work if you do it right. So I was very excited about comics again because I hadn't been reading them for a long time, and the short version is I read at the urging of a friend at a party. I read Grant Morrison's Super Gods, the book, his like weirdo book about like the history of comics / like his alien abductions / the tarot significance of 9/11. Like it's a very weird book. But I read it.
Grant Morrison, what the fuck?
I know, man. But I read it and was kind of, even though a lot of it was completely bonkers, I was like, oh, that's right. I like this kind of bonkers. Like this is sort of what I go for. And I forgot that comics can do that for you. And also he's just writing so lovingly about the comics medium and really just superheroes, I guess, but superheroes more generally. Comic stuff obviously widely overlaps there. So I read that, got energized again. And then a few months after that, got the job at New York Magazine. A few months after that, I pitched doing a story on Marvel. It wasn't even a reported story. This was just an essay. And it was really a take. I'm very embarrassed of it now. There's nothing like factually wrong in it. It's just like I was being kind of a whiny little bee. And it's like a good piece of writing. But it did really well because it was 2013 and like hot takes about Marvel and diversity were like, that was that was good currency to have.
Yeah.
That was Marvel now.
I was in favor, right? to be clear, I was in favor of the diversity. This was not complaining about diversity. This was saying like that Marvel's comics output had been more progressive in recent years or months than the MCU output. This is like late 2013, fall 2013. I believe the occasion was the launch of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the show. So it's a very different time in the history of the MCU and sort of the popular conception of the MCU and of Marvel as a brand. Because like now I would be shocked if I saw somebody on comics Twitter, progressives on comics Twitter praising Marvel for basically anything. Like there's been this real dramatic drop off of good faith and goodwill among the fandom for Marvel. But at the time, sure, there were like haters, but it was still kind of a slobs versus snobs thing. Sorry, I was getting distracted there. But the MC, sorry, I should turn this off because I'm stoned and I'm going to keep seeing these little notifications come up and they're going to keep bothering me. Anyway, so I can't figure out how to do it. So anyway, I got to write this article yammering about diversity, and I was on the right side of history, but I just was being kind of a ponce. And it did really well. And then after that, I wrote another one, then another one, then another one. And it turned into this little niche that I built at Vulture, which I still can't believe happened. It's the luckiest thing that ever happened to me in my life. And I just started writing about the comics industry. And so it started with essays, takes, and then it turned into takes that were like slightly reported. Like I wrote a thing about how great Days of Future Past, the original comic, was when Days of Future Past, the movie, was coming out. Uh-huh. And like, I just thought, there's some questions I don't have answered. I guess I could just call Chris Claremont. Like, if there's one thing that I've learned in my years of doing comics journalism, one thing that is more important, I think, for fans to understand than anything else is these guys are not just guys. These people are not famous. Like these people that we assume are powerful and influential, wealthy, whatever, the people who make comic books are not. They're none of those things. They are awesome in a lot of cases. Other cases, they're complete douchebags. Mm-hmm. But no matter who you are, unless you were Stan Lee and maybe Rob Liefeld or Todd McFarlane, you are not famous. You're not actually famous in a global mainstream sense. And you're almost certainly not wealthy because the industry pays shit. Yeah. So it became this interesting experiment where like I realized all of these great creators, I could basically just call. Like sometimes it took a slight bit of doing to like find an in there, but you really could just find their email addresses like on their personal websites, or you could, once you got like one person in the comics world, they all know all of each other. So you can just like say, hey, could you link me up with, Louise Simonson or something? And then Wheezy will hook you up with Karen Berger. And like, it's just this web of all these luminaries. And the point is they're all like going off of like Earthlink addresses and are like none of this is like through a publicist. Like I did some work with publicists, but it was always just because the project was officially Marvel. It was not because of the person. Like these people don't necessarily want publicists or feel more comfortable being more direct, and that's how it often happens. So I'm going off on a tangent, but that was how the Chris Claremont thing happened, and that was, I believe, the beginning of me reporting stuff in the comics world. I just wanted to have his perspective, and there was like a one where I was talking about Thanos, and I just called Jim Starlin, the guy who invented Thanos. You can just do this. Any of you could do this if you wanted. It's really, really easy to get in touch with comics creators. Not all of them, but more than you'd think. Yeah. Especially the older guys, because they come from a time when the stuff was really disrespected. There was no
Twitter and everything too either. So like,
no,
I don't think I actually looked up Kevin Eastman on Twitter.
Sure.
And he does not have that many followers. Right. For the dude who created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah,
it's completely bonkers. Yeah. Like this is my big crusade in writing about comics. I'll just lay out my secret master plan here. I want to be the nun in Game of Thrones walking alongside walking alongside the comics management of the comics industry and the executives who pulled the strings and just saying shame, shame, shame. I've seen how completely exploitative this industry is and how we're just not allowed to say that for some reason. Yeah. Like if you do, you get marginalized, and like this is why I was really lucky. I was at a mainstream outlet in a staff job where comics were not a big part of the ecosystem. So therefore relying on like comics advertisers was not in any way anything we had to worry about. I had this perfect position to be able to like start poking holes. And I wish I'd done it more. It took me a while to really work up the courage to have that be like a thing I do consistently. And it was hard. There are times when you have to do a delicate dance because it's a company that, you know, you do want to be able to report on in the future. It's not the same amount of pressure as like the average comics blog where like they have to just, you know, completely brown nose every comics publisher because that's their only source of revenue. For me, it was just sort of beat maintenance. Like it might be harder to report on this beat if I alienate this source. So, you know, now I'm giving you behind the scenes about how journalism works. But my point is, well, no, I'm going off on a tangent again. This is my bad habit, especially when I get stoned.
No, it's all good.
But, you know, I had this position where I had the opportunity to really report on what actually happens in the comics industry and learn. Because, again, I had a number of years off where I was just not participating with it, with the comics industry in any kind of direct way or consistent way. And then I'm like jumping back in and I had so much to learn. Now I'm a quick study, but it was a real process of like, you know, at first joy that I could talk to these people that I'd admired for so long or who had created characters that had meant so much to me or told stories that meant so much to me. And then after a while, and so that powered a lot of the early writing and research was just like, wow, this is amazing. And then like talking up the great comic stories that informed the movies that were coming out. That was the big thing that allowed me to get a lot of work done was writing about like, here's the comics backstory of movie X or character Y.
And that's honestly what we're trying to do with the podcast. You know, we always try to incorporate a specific comic or storyline that we could talk about in conjunction with whatever movie we're doing each week. So totally.
Exactly. I mean, and that was exciting to me and it was really fun. But what happens is over the course of talking with creators and executives and editors and everybody else in that ecosystem, the more you do these like, wow, the comic story was really great stories, the more you realize that all those stories incorporate like, and then this unbelievably unjust exploitative thing happened to the creator and that's why they don't make comics anymore. Or like, and then, you know, this deal was completely welched on or like, and then this person was an abusive, toxic force in the workplace. And this was, I mean, and then of course there's the sexual harassment and assault. And it's just, there's so much bad stuff that happens in the comics industry, in this industry that makes stuff that you and I love so dearly. It really started to get to me. And so that was kind of the direction that things started to go in. Not hard left turn. Like I said, I still had to maintain the beat, but like, you know, I wrote this profile of Stan. We're getting back to the actual question you asked me. I think it's important that you know all the stuff I just said because it informs where I'm coming from for the next part, which is, you know, it's August 2015. One of the editors at New York Magazine, a guy named David Wallace Wells, who's a fucking genius, just a great writer and reporter and an even better editor. He wrote this book about climate change called The Uninhabitable Earth that either you should read or never touch because it will completely freak your shit out. But it's amazing. It's one of the most amazing books I've ever read. So anyway, he walks up to my desk and he was an editor and he had a galley copy of an advanced copy of Amazing, Fantastic, Incredible, Stan's 2015 graphic memoir, which was really just, as I learned later, he didn't really have much to do with it. It was just an adaptation of his pre-existing prose memoir from a number of years earlier.
Of course.
But David walks up to my desk, slaps it down and says, you should do something with this. Because by that point, I'd been writing about comics and comics adaptations for a while. And immediately my little idea bulb lights up and I'm like, this is great. Like, this is such a cool opportunity. So I said, sure, absolutely. And I spent the next week like looking for sources and reading existing material, trying to get an interview with Stan, all this stuff. About a week in, I go talk to David and I said, hey, you know, it's going really well. I'm getting a lot of interesting stuff. And before I could get like more than like a minute into my spiel, he goes, whoa, wait. I meant you should like write a short review of this book. Like he had not been assigning me the feature that I had just invented in my head that I was now going to do. I just completely, you know, misread the cue. But to his credit, and I will be eternally grateful for this, his response was then to say like, you turn up some interesting stuff. Go. Let's see if we can make this into a feature. Nice. So it took a long while. I know it's like one of these great journalism stories. You very rarely get to say that stuff like that happens too, but I'm glad it happened in this case. So then I worked on it. It took a long time because
How long did it take between the research and the actual writing of the book to like complete this?
Oh, the book? Yeah. So the research of the article is kind of the beginning of the research for the book. And so that's, again, like August 2015. The article came out February 2016. And then I had a couple of years where I wasn't really, thinking about Stan all that much. I was following loosely the news of all the horrible things that were happening in his life. Mm-hmm. But I was not like keeping fresh on the beat. And then he died in November of 2018. And this editor at Crown Publishing, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House, got in touch with my agent and was like, I read the Stan Lee profile from 2016. Do you think your client might want to expand that out into a biography? And I was very intimidated. I almost said no. I was just because I had other plans. Like there were other things going on in my life. This was not something that I was building up to. And I felt like I was also trying to transition away from writing about comics all the time. I was trying to write about other topics as well. And so initially I was like, I don't know. And then I had like multiple friends just sort of slap sense into me and be like, the fuck is wrong with you? The biggest publisher in the English language came to you to ask you to write the book. Like you fucking do the book. So that was the right answer. And I got, I'd write an outline, but it was a pretty smooth process. Started the research in earnest around December of that year when it became clear that the book was actually going to happen. I guess it was even earlier. Maybe November. Anyway, so then it was about a year of almost exactly a calendar year from when I got the contract and really started doing the research to when I turned in the first draft. So that year was kind of the sprint. But I was able to do it because there had been buildup of that whole 6-month period in 2015, 2016. And, subsequently there's still been a lot to do, but it's not quite the same, total, horse blinders on thing.
It's really interesting to hear about that process. It's just, so just because it's not like you're saying it fell into your lap, but it's something that you weren't really.
I was very lucky. I was extremely lucky. Like I also am good at my job. I've been doing journalism for 15, 16 years now. It's the only real like career that I've had. But I'm also just, fortune turned its wheel in my direction, and I'm sure it'll turn back again at some point. That's the anxious Jew in me talking. But, for right now, I'm trying to embrace it as much as I can, and this was that was very much both the initial article and the book were really. I'm really indebted to my editors, David, and then at Crown, a guy named Will Wolfslau, who is just terrific. Nice. I was really lucky to have editors I really gelled with and who really were, they were both more confident in me than I was confident in me, specifically in terms of like using voice, like having it be uniquely sounding like me and kind of just riffing and coming up with grand theories, rather than just sticking to exact recitation of facts. Not saying anything that's not factual, but just, going beyond just presenting the information. Mm-hmm. Both of them really encouraged me to go like, this is your showcase, like go for it. The article was the longest thing I'd ever published up to that point. It was about 10,000 words. And then the book obviously is far and away the longest thing I've ever written. And, to have that opportunity and the opportunity to have editors who really encouraged me to make it sound like my own, it's incalculable. I'm so unbelievably grateful that all that has happened.
I want to go back to your anxious Jew comment.
Yes, please.
I too am Jewish, so I have to live with that burden every day. But
Shalom Aleichem.
I don't know what you just said.
I said Shalom Aleichem. You're then supposed to say Aleichem Shalom. Okay. It's like Salam Aleikum, Aleikum Salam. Okay. You'll get it next time.
I'll get it. I was also adopted into Judaism, so unfortunately.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So it makes me feel a little more chosen, but I want to go back because
that's a good line. Anyway, go ahead.
Have you ever read Krakow to Krypton by Ari Kaplan?
Not the whole thing, but I've read parts of it.
Because I liked what you were saying earlier about how, especially more so in the day that the comic book industry was really exploitive of creators and them not getting their credit. I know Joel Shuster.
Oh yeah, Siegel and Shuster is a whole other tragic story.
Yeah, they never got the credit until I think was it
the 70s.
Yeah, 70s.
I believe it was 70s. It was, that's a whole other awful story, but it's emblematic. I mean, that kind of stuff was just the order of the day for decades. And to a certain extent, it still is. Yeah. It's slightly more professional now, but not by much. And you still have like ridiculous shit that people get away with. And awful treatment for people who are being unjustly discriminated against or just treated like garbage because the people in charge are even bigger garbage. Right. It's just, I'm not going to name names, but saying all that, I don't think anyone could actually reasonably disagree with, right? Yeah. Like it's just, once you know about the inner workings of this industry, there's no way to talk about it honestly and not sound like you're just anti-comics, which I am not. I think the comics medium is one of the most amazing, life-changing things you can possibly imagine. I mean, even regarding it like that just seems too small. Yeah. Like saying it's great doesn't convey that it's just this. It's magic. It's words and pictures. It's something that's existed in some form since time immemorial, and now we have this set of idioms that are just fascinating. I love comics so much, and it just fucking rips me apart that the industry is so bad. Yeah, like it's just you have abusers and harassers and people who are, racists, and it's just awful, and you get like, that's not even getting into like Comicsgate, where like you have the creators who are like still working despite the fact that they're in that world. It's really wretched in a lot of ways, but there are so many good people in it. Now, a lot of bad people, but like the people who are like truly from the cloth of the good comics geek, who make it in that industry, even though making it in that industry is not the same as making it in the wider world, it's still really gratifying to see. And more important, just from a selfish perspective, there are a lot of geniuses out there who make stuff that I'm just glad exists. I am not on Team Comics. I am just very much on Team Comics creators and consumers, as opposed to, the big kahuna and the bad people in the bunch. I shouldn't say bad people. I hate calling people bad, but you know what I mean? Bad behavior.
Yeah. What is it about the comics industry that you think makes this so easy to get away with?
Well, nobody's paying a fucking attention. That's the thing. Like the number one reason they get away with it is nobody's paying attention. The people who are actually paying attention don't have any power or resources. Like, you have a lot of wonderful comics commentators and journalists, bloggers, whatever, who are very aware of what's going on. Sometimes they're misguided, but like they're deeply plugged in, and they could be writing great investigative journalism about the comics industry, but they are not. Nobody is funding that. I mean, I've never even been able to do that. Like, I won't get into details, but like, there's always this question of, is this worth the potential legal risk of going after X, Y, and Z? And so
sorry, is there like some like well-known like, obviously I'm not asking you to name anybody.
I'm not going to name names, but there are definitely people out there who are still completely enshrined and are just have done wretched, awful things. And some of them are, things I know about because I'm sourced. Some of them are just out in the open, and yet for some reason nobody suffers any consequences. Yeah. And so, there's a lot of people like that. It's really, really bad. It's especially bad for women and people of color, and trans people, and it's just, the stuff I hear about, like anti-Semitic stuff that comes up I mean, that's not a ton of it.
No, but in a recent issue
and then there was that Incredible Hulk, Immortal Hulk thing. Yeah, exactly. Which just like, how does nobody catch that?
I know.
Like, how do you?
What's this Immortal Hulk thing?
Oh God. Well, it's a whole rabbit hole, but there was a panel in the most recent issue of Immortal Hulk where Joe Bennett drew this Jewish jewelry store in the jewelry district. And it has this like window that has this giant Magen David, like Star of David right there. And it says Jewery, not jewelry.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
And like someone's head or something is covering exactly like.
It's no. Someone's head is covering a different letter. The letter that you can see very clearly that there is no L. It just says jewelry. Right. It's not that big a deal, but it's just like in and of, I'm saying as a Jew, I feel like I'm allowed to slightly discount that. Like I didn't read it and feel like threatened or anything. It was just sort of like, what the fuck? How did this end up in here? How would this go past all these eyeballs and nobody saw this thing that, like, even if it was unintentional, is really offensive.
And something similar happened with X-Men Gold #1 like a few years back.
Well, that was, to their credit, not in their defense, rather, I should say. X-Men Gold #1 was a weirder situation because the main stuff in there was anti-Christian from an Indonesian perspective, because the artist, the penciler, was Indonesian. So he was slipping in messages from this, slogans rather, from this campaign against, I believe it was a regional governor or maybe a mayor who was Christian, and the Muslim population would say, some members of that would say awful things. So those were up there. I would be shocked if somebody was able to detect that stuff. There was I feel like you kind of get a pass for missing out on hyper specific racist slogans or bigoted slogans from around the world. But there was that Kitty Pryde thing in that same issue. I did not read that as anti-Semitic personally. I thought that was, it didn't even seem anti-Semitic, whether or not, let alone whether it was intended as such. But the point is, with Joe Bennett recently, it was just a reminder that comics are put together so slapdash and so quickly with so little oversight, which is something to remember and is kind of an emperor has no clothes moment. And the other thing is just that people are not trained. These are people who are not training themselves or have not been trained to think about, marginalized identities while they're not that, Jews, it gets complicated when you say marginalized, but minority groups that have historically been targeted by bigotry and bigoted imagery, which Lord knows in comics, there's a long tradition of that. You gotta try and excise that part.
Absolutely.
Oh God, sorry. I'm just going off on a rant right now, but it's just,
I also feel like, because going back to holding these people accountable, that because it's not like when we were talking about how no one knows who these people are, these artists and these writers, it's harder to put a face to them. So it's not like actors and musicians that you can hold them accountable so easily in the public eye. So they probably do tend to get away with more.
Well, and then the thing that also complicates it is if somebody does do something bad, because the industry is so terrible and so many of these people are, the point is, you can. Oh God, I lost my train of thought. Damn it! This is my number one problem when I smoke pot. Everything else, I'm so lucid. My memory doesn't really go, but I will just have these moments where I get distracted by a mote in my eye, and then abruptly it's the train has completely jumped the track. So I'm going to ask you what I said, although I remember it being somewhat rough. But what was I saying?
Shit.
Are we all too stoned? It's fine. It doesn't matter. It's just more of me ranting about how the comics industry is terrible. I remember now. You can always end up with the shitty fact that if somebody did do something bad, they can plausibly be look, I'm not wealthy or famous. The consequences of this thing will really ruin my life. And that just ends up complicating and muddying the waters every time. You have to have all these moral calculuses in your head. So it's not a great industry, but it does create some art that is, I take back what I said earlier when you're talking about comics writers who are well known. Gaiman's probably the only one who's on par with Stan.
Oh, yeah, true.
I was drawing a blank on exactly saying
so
that name. Anyway,
can I jump off of something? I it's kind of connected. Please. So I'm going to assume that, and this is something I think, Jake, you brought up when we were talking about this, but I don't know if you brought it up yet, that did you feel a certain type of way? Like you're obviously presenting Stan Lee in a way a lot of us haven't seen. And it's a shock, obviously, for a lot of I think just, regular people. My only experience, I'm a huge comic fan, but my only experience knowing the history until recently, just reading what people say on Twitter about Jack Kirby and is if you ever seen the G4 show X Play.
No, I haven't. What is that?
Back in the day. So it was just a video game review show back in the day. But they used to have this segment called the Stan Lee Experience. And it would be what?
Oh, yeah. Right. Oh, go on. What were you going to say?
So it's just this guy in a cheap Stan Lee costume, just kind of talking like him. And he's always just shitting on Jack Kirby. That's the whole shtick. Whatever Marvel game.
That's so funny. I heard about that, but I hadn't actually watched that. It's just not on my I should have looked at that.
It's hard to find. I don't think it's on.
Is it hard to find? Yeah. Okay, yeah. It didn't cross my radar, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just something I remember. And when that came out, I'm probably 14, and I'm really? Why are they showing Stan Lee as such a garbage person? And I found it hilarious.
Yeah. No, it's for a long time. the way it's worked is it's word of mouth. It's like somebody at the comic shop, somebody at a con, whatever, tells you, "Hey kid, did you know that, Stan isn't so great?" That's when you start to get, the knowledge. And yet, although that is part of the journey of a comics fan, a lot of the time, if I hope more comics fans have that journey, but it often happens. That's part of, that's how it used to work. And it would be what I tried to do with this book is go like, can we codify that? But also more importantly, investigate it and do it. Even the people who will tell you like, oh, Jack was ripped off, they don't necessarily really have facts or research that they've done into that. That's also just word of mouth that they heard from somebody else. It's, whether or not it's true, you're not having outlets that are financing actual investigative journalism into this stuff or just journalism really at all into this stuff. So, I wanted with this book to kind of take a stab at that and just say that it's a story that everybody should know. Yeah. Like it's not, and not even just if you're into comics or into Marvel or into superheroes, like it's so emblematic of so many things that are just fucked up in the contemporary American society. I mean, or in the American 20th century.
Like you talk about like we're supposed to believe the American dream, like is this and that, but Stan Lee, did the opposite.
Yeah, Stan was well, that was the thing. Yeah, I say that in the introduction. I was like, Stan's whole bit was that he was the embodiment of the American dream, which was if you work hard and stay true to yourself, you'll succeed, right? Yeah. And yet that's how you get ahead. And yet, the real story of Stan Lee is, I'm not saying he's the devil by any means. I'm not trying to cancel Stan Lee, but like once you start looking at the actual historical record, you find out that like it's, I don't know.
Can you cancel someone once they're dead? How does that?
Well, I will say there are a lot of withering comments I get from people who don't like the book. Despite not having read it.
I actually have a question. I have a question about that.
Yes, please.
Because Stan Lee, like we mentioned, is so well loved by mainstream fans and generally comic book fans. Were you hesitant at all to hear that backlash of them? Especially because we all know him as I'm 32 years old. We're all in our 30s. We grew up seeing him in these cameos. He was already an old man, so already has this grandpified image. And so that also, I think, helps people's image of why they like him so much, because it's almost like, oh, you're attacking this little old man. Were you hesitant to?
Sure. Well, that's what people keep saying. I mean, one of the comments I get that's kind of bewildering to me, and yet it makes all the sense in the world why they would be saying it, is, how dare you ruin the name of a dead man or and which is interesting because it's like, well, on the face of it, that's just not how society works. You write biographies of people who are no longer with us. Like just because, I mean, if anything, well, whatever. It's just that's not how the world works. But I get what they're saying, which is Stan means a lot to people. Mm-hmm. People have really incorporated Stan Lee into their lives, into their personal cosmologies, into their sort of personal religious relationship with Marvel or with the movies or whatever. And, there was a line in, this writer, Dorian Linsky, wrote a review of my book that was really just sort of an essay about it that was very nice. And he, damn it, I lost my train of thought. What was I just saying?
You said Dorian Linsky.
Dorian Linsky, right. What was the line though? He had a good line in there and I can't remember what it was. Oh, God damn it. See, this is what I was nervous about doing this interview, because when it's with just me and my partner, then it's fine. But anyway, he means a lot to a lot of people. And I approached this topic with respect for that. Like, I'm not trying to ruin anybody's childhood or whatever. That's not the goal here. The goal was to tell a story that's rooted in evidence and doesn't have any rose-colored glasses. I never really had that kind of relationship with Stan Lee as a brand, as a person, whatever. I was very aware of him. I watched the Marvel Action Hour when I was growing up. So I saw those little live action intros he would do. That was my introduction to him. And then I read comics later, and it was still the era when it was Stan Lee Presents, insert thing here. And then I will tell you in a moment the story, or remind me to tell you the story of when I met him, the one time I ever met him, which was when I was at Wizard World 1998. I believe it was 1998. And I went it was my first con, and I'll just tell you now. So I got in line, and this was 98. So it's Marvel's still in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Yeah. Stan is doing nothing. Stan has not had a successful project in decades, but he's still technically at Marvel. And the whole industry has cratered in general. So I went to this con. Like, this is around when I started reading comics, by the way. That's what I love about the millennial generation is, like, there's a significant portion of us who, like, started reading when comics was at its, like, lowest point.
Yeah.
The industry, and in some ways the creative work as well was, like, at the worst, especially superhero comics was in just the worst place that it had been in a long time. But so Stan was signing that day, and I waited in line for, like, 15 minutes. That was it. Really? Like, 15 minutes, half hour. Like, there was a line, but it wasn't that big, and you didn't have to pay anything to get the signature. You just walk up and hand him something, you would sign it. And like there in the book, I have a picture of me getting the copy, beat up copy of Fantastic Four number 47. I'm getting it signed in the photo. I slid it over to Stan. He's dressed up like Stan. My mom takes out this disposable camera that I'd given her so we could document the moment. She takes the photo. That's the image that's frozen, and we have that image now forever. And then the moment, nanosecond after that flash goes off, after what you're seeing in the photo, Stan looks at me, looks at my mom, and I'm not making this up. There's no reason why I would make this up. He looks at me, looks at my mom, and he says, "You've immortalized me."
Holy shit.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
What?
It's a little weird. Yeah, I know. That's what he said. So flash forward, and but that was, although that was a cool moment, I never really developed that kind of emotional relationship with the idea of Stan Lee. But I get why other people have. And I have quotes from people like, not just, pros and fans and everybody, people who really were moved by the presence of Stan Lee. So the story that I told is not just all negative. Right. It's
something that I found interesting in the story too, is that like when you present Jack Kirby, you're presenting him just as truthfully. Like a lot of his stories, don't always add up. Stories
don't add up. Yeah, sure. Does that mean he was lying? Who knows? I mean, one of the things that I keep saying about this book is like, the number one thing I want to convey is you have to live with ambiguity, whether it's moral ambiguity or factual ambiguity. You have to live with the fact that there are going to be things you never know, that you just don't have a firm answer on, because people fucking hate thinking about that. That's not people being dumb. That's just the human brain doesn't want to have ambiguity. Ambiguity it's dangerous.
Right.
And the message I was sort of trying to convey is like, Stan is neither saint nor sinner. I mean, he was neither saint nor Satan. And who else is that way? Literally everybody. Yeah. Like, it's just, it sounds so simple. It's like this dumb, almost truism to say something like that. But you have to remind people, especially when it comes to contemporary celebrities. People really have this, lowercase s Stan culture right now, where it's like, the thing you love is the greatest thing in the world, and the people who make it, or the person you identify it with is the second coming. And then that's how people get away with shit. You treat celebrities like they're not real people, and you end up with like fucking Justin Timberlake. Like, only now are people waking up to the fact that the guy sucks.
Hey, Alpha Dog is a great movie.
I'm a big fan I'm a huge fan of Southland Tales. I think Justin Timberlake is great in Southland Tales. But like, my point being, when you worship somebody like that, they can get away with anything because you're not looking for it. And then, on the converse, just in terms of like ruining your brain, sometimes something will happen that causes you to criticize that person, and then they're just human excrement to you. Yeah. You just, it's all or nothing. And it's just not a healthy way to live your emotional and mental life. But it's really hard to accept that there are there are questions you can't answer about a person, whether it's, did this thing happen? Who knows? Or was this person a good person or a bad person? Well, there's no real answer to that. It's not just that you won't know.
When you were doing your research, did you have one of those like noir moments where someone came out? It was like, Abraham, you're digging too deep. You need to turn back. You're asking the wrong questions. Turn around.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get into details, but there were a number of people who wanted to chase me off the story. I mean, there's a lot that people, when people read the book, they'll see why. Like, there's a lot of bad stuff that happened in Stan Lee's life, and a lot of money on the line, and a lot of people's legal futures on the line. So there were a lot of people who tried to not like buy me off, but tried to charm me into portraying them well, or tried to bully me into portraying them well, or leave veiled threats.
I'm picturing like Sopranos goons coming up to you.
It's not quite that. Well, I mean, it's not quite like that. It's just, it's interesting. I don't want to get into too much detail because I don't want to,
All right.
But it's a sensitive topic. But it was interesting to have this situation where there were things that people didn't want me to know, and then that other people really wanted me to know, so I'd hear about it from the other person. So it was a real long, wild process reporting this.
So can I go back to something you were talking about? Just like the way like you have to present a person, obviously saint or Satan or whatever. Because I know you're working on something like another.
I'm writing a biography of Vince McMahon next. I have a contract with Simon and Schuster to do that one.
Yeah.
Another very complicated figure. I don't want to get too much into Vince just because I want to hold my powder for when I write the book. But no, another person who there are a lot of parallels with Stan.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of differences, but they are both people who, and this is, I think, not spoiling anything that might be in the Vince book. They're both people who really took industries that were regarded as redheaded stepchildren. I can say that because I'm a redhead and a stepchild. They took these industries and made them cool, which is very difficult to do, and had not really been done before either of them pulled it off. And like hip,
right.
Not just because both wrestling and comics had been huge, popular things, but they were never really regarded as like, other than like the occasional Roland Barthes essay, it was never really considered like high culture, much less hip, something that was cool. And then, much as, Stan in the 60s made comics cool, thanks to the Marvel Revolution and his selling of it, you then have Vince really on like a couple of occasions, but especially in the late 90s, really just making wrestling this very sexy commodity, both literally and figuratively. And, I'm fascinated by people who are able to do that. And what drives them to do that sort of thing, and what the impact is of the fact that the person who did that was them. There's always this big question of like, well, if this person had never been born, if Stan or Vince had never been born, what would have happened to comics or wrestling respectively? And you can never know the answer to that, but it's something that's important to contemplate because it makes you consider who the other people in the arena were and kind of the ways that it could have gone.
And I'm sure their influence extends outside their own arena. So it just like,
Oh yeah. In both cases, well, especially with Vince, their influence is far beyond just their industry. And, that's where it gets a little more complicated. Vince has a lot more power than Stan ever really had. Stan was, I get when he was publisher of Magazine Management, that was a fair amount of power, but he wasn't even the owner. I mean, the owner was this Cadence Industries, this corporate entity. He never had that kind of power of life or death that Vince does, and has had and continues to have, and has had for decades and decades. So it's a different kind of power relationship, but it is still similarly like this paterfamilias character who had a tremendous amount of impact and has a lot of a lot going on. I'll keep it that vague.
Gotcha. No, yeah. I love it. I can't wait to read more about that.
Yeah, that one's a challenge because I hadn't been following wrestling in longer than I hadn't been following comics.
Gotcha.
So I've had to really jump back in. And past couple of months I've been just shot because it's all Stan all the time. I was doing all the, the way book tours work now, like I said, is just doing media. Like there's nothing else that you do. So it was just me leveraging every connection I had and like following up on every email. And like, that's just how, and just because the resources and fame aren't there to have book authors more easily promote, or get promoted.
I used to be a writer's assistant for WWE, and my fiance.
Oh, no kidding.
And my fiance was a production manager there. So I
got to interview you.
Yeah, I was only there. Listen, I was only there for like 5 or 6 months. It's not like I know like the ins and outs, but
still, yeah. I love the little stories are often things that sort of, people who are just there for a flash moment.
Yeah, right.
That's very often some of the most interesting stuff.
Because I met Vince a couple times and everything.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Don't save this good stuff.
Cool.
I'm going to contact you afterward and we can negotiate something.
Awesome.
I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. My fiance too. She probably has way more. She was there for like a year, but Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'll get into. Oh, I'm so glad I replied to this tweet. This is brilliant. I've cultivated a source.
You've immortalized me, Abraham.
Nice. Bringing it back. Jeez. All right. What else you got?
Hey, if you had to write about any superhero, who would it be?
Like, what do you mean? Like write a biography of a superhero, or
would you ever like? I know you do, obviously, like journalistic writing, but if you were to write a story about a superhero, like,
not like not nonfiction, like write fiction. Oh, well, no, that's easy. My ultimate dream. I'm Jewish. I think way too much about being Jewish. My ultimate dream is to write the most badass, fucking Jewish as shit Magneto story.
Yes.
Like I want the Jewiest and Jewiest Magneto story, because he is the best bad Jew in fiction. Yeah. Like, there is nobody who is better at being like just a fucking dickhead, but also one of ours. Like, that's such a great feeling. Like, well, every population has this. Like every demographic slice, whatever you want to call somebody, whatever vector you want to look at, and like that, you have to have characters where you can see yourself in how like just like selfish and shitty they are, or like how fucked up they are, or whatever. Not have them be these shining paragons. Like, this is why Harley Quinn is way more popular than Wonder Woman, and nobody wants to say that. Like Harley Quinn's reach extends way beyond just like people who actually watch superhero movies. Like, that's just metastasized.
My 2-year-old niece asked to be Harley Quinn for Halloween. Like, out of
exactly.
nowhere.
Harley is just iconic. And I wrote this whole long feature about Harley's development and reception back in, I believe, 2015. And, what I ended with was this quote from this one Harley cosplayer who was like, the reason I love her is because she gets to be completely messy. Like, she's just a total mess. And usually female characters in superhero comics are just written as like fucking, Wonder Woman or, any number of other, just sort of like bland, kind of doesn't want to offend anybody.
Have to be perfect.
These are characters. Characters that just like are so perfect because everyone's so afraid of offending. And that makes sense. Like, I would rather people be bland and not offended. But, if you can pull it off, the ultimate magic is being able to have a character where it comes from a place of respect for the community that you're writing about, that this person is plucked from, but at the same time depicts them as like a fucking mess of a human being, because that's something that we can all relate to. Mm-hmm. And Magneto, I feel like, is just, for the Jewish population, the best example of like, here's this guy who's like, could not be more Jewish, right? Like, he's a fucking Holocaust survivor. Yeah. Like, he went through it. And he, at the same time, like, came out with this lesson that makes sense, sure, but also is like fucking genocidal. Yeah. Like, it's such a badass move. Like, it's hard to know exactly who to credit for that transition. Like, I wrote this article 2 years ago now when Dark Phoenix came out about how Magneto became Jewish, which again was this story that I thought was just out there. I assumed I just didn't know it, but like, at what point he became canonically Jewish, or basically canonically. Later it was fully canonically, and it turned out that it was just like Chris Claremont, who I found out was Jewish, which is crazy to me because the name Chris Claremont betrays no Yiddish guy. Well, he's a matrilineal Jew, so his father is not Jewish, but his mother is, and by Jewish law, that means he's fully Jewish. Your mother has to be Jewish. Well, we can go into a whole conversation about Jewish law later, but Claremont was Jewish, and not like practicing, but he was aware, and he went to Israel and lived on a kibbutz for a little bit, and he was the guy who went, it makes more sense for this character if he's Jewish, and like lived in was in the camps. And it's a brilliant narrative decision. And Claremont obviously respects Jews. He's not, he's one of us, and he's doing this story, and he did it so tastefully and so fascinatingly. And it became just fundamental to who this character is. The first X-Men movie, it opens with Magneto, with Eric in Auschwitz, right, like tearing up the metal. Like, that's the first fucking thing you see in the entire franchise is Jewish trauma and the suffering of a population somebody's trying to annihilate. And but he comes out on the other side, and he's not some kindly grandpa who preaches peace. he's this complete asshole. Like, not only does he have a genocidal program, he's a total dick about it too. Like, he's not a pleasant guy to deal with. And I love that. And then you add in the like interesting biographical details that Claremont came up with for him. Like, the thing everybody forgets is, and this is what my ideal story is. I'll just pitch you the story. I mean, I've been waiting for somebody to ask me about this and for me to be high enough that I can describe it. But it's where Eric and Charles met. Do you guys do you know canonically in the comics where Eric and Charles met?
So okay, I thought canonically they actually met over like in the Middle East or outside of North America.
Yep. Where?
Egypt? No.
Nope. They met in Israel.
Oh. Okay.
They meet in the Jewish state, which, if you are Jewish, is fucking fascinating. Like, you know, Israel is the big other in the Jewish community. It's just that it's the other thing that exists that everything sort of orbits around and exists in dialogue with. And so if you're interested in Israel and Zionism and that part of the world, the way it's developed, and the way it interacts with the fundamental Jewishness of existence, you know, you're going to find it fascinating that Eric is, you know, when he gets out of the camps, he goes to Israel. He makes Aliyah. And he lives there. And Israel is a very specific and very ideologically influential environment to be in. And being there in the 40s and 50s was very specific. And what I really want to do is tell the story of Charles and Eric meeting in Israel. And like Claremont did this just little grace note in his story where he introduced their first meeting, where they're in Israel and there's just this 2-page spread. I believe it's 2 pages, maybe it's just one, where it's basically the two of them, Eric and Charles, and Gabrielle Haller, the fellow camp survivor who Charles is in country to work with because he's doing psychology stuff with her. She's like in a catatonic state. Anyway, there's this little grace note where like they go they walk around and travel around Israel. Like, there's just this montage of like, there's no details given about what's happening while they're doing it. It's just like they went on this trip. So it's just this huge gap where like somebody can tell the story of these people, these Jews. Not Charles isn't Jewish, but you know, being in the Jewish state, and especially Magneto's perspective on like meeting this guy who also, this is the reason why it would have to be fanfic and could never actually be Marvel because Charles and Eric fuck. Like, that's not to sound like too much of a weirdo about it, but like I so vastly prefer the interpretation that they had a romantic and sexual relationship prior to, like, no, I'm serious. I mean, anyway, I don't have to go down that road too much if it's going to scandalize you.
I love that.
Yeah, go down that road.
I think I'm not saying it just because I think it's hot. I just think it makes more. No, I just think it makes more sense narratively and thematically when you see the way. I mean, especially in the X-Men movies, where like very obviously Picard. Oh my God, call him Picard. Jesus Christ! Don't tell anybody that happened. Where you have Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen very clearly playing it as though they're ex-boyfriends, but like, you know, it's not canon there, but like it works so well because it just defines that relationship, and it defines the lack of relationship or the way the relationship turns sour. Like, it creates that. I mean, wouldn't you turn into a supervillain if like your ex was trying to take over the world? Like, you would, you know, like trying to change the world in a way you didn't like. Like, it's a special kind of
it's almost petty,
visceral. Like ideological, but it's also petty. And what's great in like good fanfic about that stuff is it's like both men, especially Magneto, Eric, don't really know the degree to which where the pettiness ends and the actual ideology begins, where it's like, am I just doing this because I have this weird relationship with this guy and I can't let go? Or do I actually have a principled disagreement with him and that's the real driving force? And does it matter if these are my ideal story would be like I would debate whether I want it to be set and entirely take place during the trip in Israel, or whether I want that to be flashbacks and have the core thing be something set more contemporaneously. But either way, it would be a story that would not really have any action in it. Like, this is something that Marvel would never let me do. It would have to, if I did it, I would have to file the series off and just write something based on it. But like, I want something that's like a talky piece where like Magneto is talking about what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be an Israeli, what it means to have survived the camps, all of this shit, and talking to Charles, who's like a genius, but also a complete idiot about so many things.
Well, also, in the comics, Magneto finds the mutant island of Genosha, which is very much a parallel.
And now Krakoa, which is very much an Israel metaphor in certain specific ways. No, well, that's the thing. That was what made me start thinking about it. Was reading the first issue of House of X last year.
Yeah, that was great.
It was 2 years ago now. An amazing issue of a comic book, like one of the best single superhero issues I've ever read. And seeing the way that Hickman, who I don't know whether he's Jewish or not, I once asked him and he didn't answer the question, so who knows? But it was over email, so he just ignored that I asked him. But anyway, but the point is he knows his shit. Like whether or not he's Jewish, he gets the dynamics that play into Zionism and this idea of sort of separatist self-defense.
That guy's so smart. I love Hickman.
Hickman's a very smart writer, very, very smart writer. And that was what got me thinking about it. I was like, why has nobody done a story about like this directly about Magneto and Israel? Like it's very specifically alluding to that relationship in House of X, because he brings all of the ambassadors to Jerusalem. He brings them to the old city of Jerusalem, and that's where he says you have new gods now. It's very deliberately placed in the Holy Land, and that was got me thinking. Like somebody needs to write the story of like how that relationship works in his head and how it's bound up with his relationship with this man he loves and also hates. So anyway, that's my vague pitch. I have no idea how I'd actually write it. I have to do a lot more research so I could get like period things correct. But like, I do have a burning desire to someday write that.
Nice. I really like that. I feel like it would be like such a definitive story for the.
Yeah, I feel like you could really do some. I mean, maybe it's not even me doing it. Maybe I just like bully some other Jewish creator into doing it and just. I'll just stay out of it. Because that's the thing. I just want to see it exist. It's not that I think like I need to write it. It's more just nobody else seems to be writing it. So maybe I have to do it. But if I could get somebody who's like really, a lot better at writing comics, because Lord knows I haven't, or writing superhero stories, because I also haven't done that, or writing fiction at all, because I haven't really done that. Then happy to offer any kind of unpaid and uncredited advice that person might need. I just want to see this thing exist.
Who would you cast as Magneto in an MCU reboot?
An MCU reboot. No, that's where it gets complicated, because I do see the point that people make when there's like rumors that, a black person who's not Jewish is going to get cast as Magneto. Yeah. People will be like, well, this is, erasing Jews, whatever. And I get it. I get where that's coming from, but I do think it's portable enough.
Right. They're also based off of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King anyway.
Well, not really. I mean, it wasn't. That's a misconception. But it comes from a cultural milieu that, like, I guess is sort of like that. But no, that's a common misconception. That was not the truth. But it's part of the Stan Lee myth, man. People believe stuff. But the point is, like, but you make the right point, which is these are archetypes. Like, it doesn't have. I personally don't think Magneto has to be Jewish. I just think it works really well that he's Jewish. I think there are other experiences that you can have that character go through that will lead him to similar conclusions. And if anything, this is the part where I get really heretical. I think it should probably not be a Jew, because the thing is, the Jewish trauma that Magneto is responding to, aka the fucking Holocaust, is something that somebody of the right age to be in this story can't have experienced. Right, And I don't want to see some like Jewish character and then like have him go through some kind of like minor trauma compared to the Holocaust. Yeah. Also, like anti-Semitism in the way that it existed prior to the Holocaust just is not in that mode, just doesn't exist anymore and hasn't. So it's like, it would be so dishonest and shitty. I'd much rather, in fact, have it be somebody who is not Jewish. At least if they're going to go with sort of that trauma motivator, which I think you kind of have to do with.
I mean, that's interesting. We talked about this in the first episode. We brought this up at that point, especially in the MCU timeline, they're already even further ahead in years. So just by that point, like Magneto having a backstory where he was like alive during the Holocaust,
it doesn't make any sense. I mean, well, especially you could maybe do it that like he was alive then and like his magnet powers keep him de-aged.
That's what I said. I would like, because
that's what they say in the comics too. But like,
he controlled magnetism, he could like stop.
Yeah, but like, then it's just one of those things where you just like you're just supposed to not think too hard about it. And I think that would be weird, but also like, you'd have to have, it's important that he be actually roughly the same age as Charles, I think.
Right.
I think they have to have come from similar worlds and have similar perspectives, and not have it be like one of them is an ancient person and the other person is much younger. I like this idea that they're about at parity, but have had just radically different lives that have led them to radically different conclusions.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were writing the book, did you find that you had to leave stuff, for lack of a better phrase, on the editing floor that you would have otherwise liked to see in the?
Sure. Oh, there's plenty in there. I mean, I'm writing some things I'm writing one thing for another outlet that is picking up some of my scraps and odds and ends. But there's a lot of stuff. I mean, one thing that I'm hoping to do, if I can get permission from the people involved, is I'm hoping to print the full transcripts of a number of my interviews, of the interviews that were most, I think, important for comics history and comics journalism.
Nice.
I did some interviews that just had a lot of rich detail that had never been said before, and I included a lot of that in the book. But you're not publishing a full transcript in the book, so the big ones that stick out in my mind are, I have about 5.5 hours of interview with Larry Lieber, Stan's brother.
Oh. Wow.
Which is a lot of material. And he said a lot of interesting stuff. Not all of it about Stan. I mean, Stan was the sort of, organizing factor, but it was also, about just his career and about the industry and about people he knew. And that stuff I think would be really, there's stuff in there that I'm sure doesn't even mean anything to me, but like hardcore comics heads who are older than me and like lived through whatever, will pick up on and go, oh wow, this is something that's really useful to be out there.
It also seems
the other one is,
sorry, I was going to say, it just seemed like Larry Lieber was like a voice of reason a little bit, because he has like you pointed out, he has nothing really to gain. Like he doesn't really want to have anything to do with Marvel or
no. He you can never know fully 100% whether somebody's telling the truth. Maybe they're lying, or maybe they just don't remember or misremember. But the sense I got was Larry was not trying to hide anything. When he was talking about the comics industry, he was not trying to take more credit than he deserved, because he doesn't really care about credit in the comics industry, because he kind of regrets that he got into the comics industry in the first place. He does not have good thoughts about his career, which is, very sad, because he did some amazing work. But he was a fascinating conversation to have, and an important figure that I want to have understood. And so my hope is I can get his permission to publish that. The other one is Nat Friedland. This is a much shorter interview, but still a really fascinating one. Nat Friedland being this journalist who wrote this profile of Marvel Comics in 1965, was published the first week of 1966, that completely ruined the Stan Lee Jack Kirby relationship. It was this article in the New York Herald Tribune's magazine section, which, by the way, later became New York Magazine. So and prior to that, there'd been weird points where the New York Herald Tribune had intersected with Stan's life. So for whatever reason, I'm part of that cosmic chain. Nat Friedland wrote this profile of Marvel, and it was so glowing in its depiction of Stan, and so disrespectful and shitty in its depiction of Jack. And it came out, and even though Stan was not like writing the article, it was this moment where Jack realized he was never going to be appreciated at Marvel. Like just no one was ever going to get what he was and what he was doing. So even though it's 1966 and Jack sticks around until, late 69, 70, that was really the moment when he decided he was going to leave and not invent new characters and just sort of wait it out. So the point is, Nat Friedland wrote this article. It's massively consequential in comics history and therefore in pop culture history in general. He had no idea. No one had ever reached out to him. He's a hard guy to find. I found him on some online database. I can't remember which People Finder database it was, but I just found his email address. I emailed him. I said, can I talk to you? It's chat roulette, right? Exactly. I said, so I just sent him an email and said, I'm doing this book. Can I interview you? And initially he called me and he says, tell me more about this. I told him more and he said, not interested. And then I just sort of did a Hail Mary and wrote him again. And I was like, or maybe he called only the second time. But the point was he rejected me the first time. And I just did like the most pathetic please. Like I just contacted him again and was like, I don't have anything I can bargain with. I just would love to talk to you. Like, please, can I talk to you? And he said yes. So we had this great conversation. It was a pair of conversations actually, where I just completely introduced him to the fact that this article had any impact. He like had just moved on in his life.
Wow.
And hadn't thought about it in decades. He'd thought about it in November 2018 when Stan died, because he read an article in Wired about Stan's life and legacy and how it was complicated. And he read that and he was like, oh, Stan Lee. Yeah, I remember writing an article about him. And then like I call him up a few months later and he's like, yeah, I was just thinking about that. Why? Why are you asking? And I was like, oh, you don't get it. Like, you don't know. And he's like, I don't know what. And I'm like, you don't know that like this article was massively consequential in the comics world and among comics historians is held up as this seminal document that is like a turning point for the medium and for the genre and for everything. And he was just like, I had no clue. No one had ever told him that.
Oh.
So we had that, and no one had tracked him down. Now, this is a guy that people have tried to find. Comics historians have tried to find unsuccessfully. And I don't know why I was successful. I didn't do anything special. I think it just, maybe his email address popped up in some crawler and finally it was available. But I think that interview is important. I mean, there was stuff in there that illuminated how that article happened and what went into it and in the aftermath of it. And I found it fascinating. My hope is I can get his permission to just publish that interview just on my website or something for free, just so people can have access to it and incorporate it into whatever research they do. Because the comics historian world of just amateur comics historians who like all have day jobs and just do this because just for the love of the game and are the experts on this stuff, I owe them everything. I mean, a lot of this book would not have been possible if I wasn't standing on the research that those people had done. So I want to just contribute back to that and be like, okay, well, here's something that may be of interest and may help in future attempts to suss out what makes this industry so fucked up, how it turned into what it is today.
Yeah, I feel like this is it's got to be one of the most important books on comics history of all time.
Which?
Your book.
Mine?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there aren't that many. So, but I thank you. My hope is that it will have, look, beyond tooting my own horn, I just hope it does legitimize comics journalism and history a bit and legitimize it to the point where people can get resources to do it because it's really fucking important. And it's a shit shame that there is no backing for it happening. So, I'm not going to be under any illusion that this book is going to mean reams of investigative journalism into the comics industry as much as that may be necessary. But hopefully it can encourage editors to be a little more excited about the idea of publishing stuff about the comics industry. I would count that as a win more so than really almost anything else.
Yeah, I'm hungry for more for sure. So,
and I'm hungry for lunch, so I'm going to bounce off. But
yeah.
Well, dude,
are we good?
Yeah, we're totally good. Dude, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Dude, this was great. Yeah. You got to have me back on. I've never done like a stoned interview about like comics before. This was the best.
Dude,
thank you.
Yeah, next time I got an article coming out or something, I'll hit you guys up and we can set this up.
Yeah, man. Cool.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so cool. Abraham Riesman, thank you for coming on the show. His book, I'm too high.
True Believer, I got it. True Believer, The Rise and Fall of Stan Lee.
Is out right now. You can go buy it.
Yeah, it's available where books are sold. You can go to abrahamriesman.com and you'll find links there as well as blurbs and descriptions and everything. Although I guess if you've listened to this whole episode by now, you probably know whether or not you're going to want to buy the book. I don't think additional information is going to be all that important to you. But yeah, abrahamriesman.com. It's I before E.
Dude, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, take care.
Bye.
Have a great one. Talk to you soon.
Dude, I am hungry too, but...
Are we still recording? I think we're still.
Hi, you're listening to Comics and Chronic, and I'm Jacob H.
I'm Cody Cannon.
And I'm Anthony Iannaccio.
And you can tune in every Thursday to hear new episodes of Comics and Chronic.
And make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Comics and Chronic. That's Comics, the letter N, Chronic.
We'll see you guys next week.
Woo!
Peace.